All right. My name is Doug Miles. Welcome to Phoenix PM. And tonight I will be talking about behavior-driven development in Perl. You may or may not have heard of behavior-driven development. It's kind of a new-ish thing that's come out, a technique that's come out, mostly in the Agile Scrum world. And for those who don't know what Agile and Scrum are, I will have a little tutorial in this so that you'll kind of get a brief background to what this is all about. So, before BDD, we had TDD, which was test-driven development. You would write a failing test that defines a function. Then you would write a minimum amount of code to get that test to actually pass, and then you would refactor, improve the code, and then you would just keep going through that process. And as you needed new features, you'd add new tests and then new code and stuff like that. So, so far as that makes sense to everybody? The idea being that you are actually having tests for your code, which a lot of times if you write the code first, you don't end up with tests at all. And the other idea being that you could have more complete test coverage and more confidence of the code that you're writing if you had a failing test first and then you actually made it pass by writing code. So that was kind of one of the guiding principles. And I will give the disclaimer, especially for those of you on YouTube that are watching this, that I'm kind of glossing over a lot of details. This is just kind of high-level description of this. Okay. So in comes BDD, which is similar to TDD, but is supposed to kind of fix some of the failings or add new features to TDD. So what BDD does is it's basically plain English, which those of you who have programmed in COBOL may be cringing at this point, but it's basically a plain English description of what a certain function should be doing. And then underneath that are the actual tests that implement or that are testing that functionality that you described in plain English. And then under that, you have either no code when you start or code that hopefully is passing those tests. So the thing that's good about it being in plain English is you can actually have business owners or product owners writing the BDD tests as their specification. So you can get a lot better specs from them. It just so happens here we have a really, really excellent, Phil, you owe me if you are hearing this, but we have a really excellent product owner who's actually very tech savvy. So we don't usually have a problem, but that's not always the case. You know, you have a great variation in product owners, you know, technical understanding and ability. The idea being, though, if you can get them to write things that are in plain English, you know, then you go back and forth between the developers and the product people, and you work out exactly what the functionality is. So the other thing is it puts focus on the business, the actual business needs, rather than, you know, the technical needs, which sometimes, you know, developers get caught up in, you know, that, oh, I need this and I need this function and I need to, oh, I actually need to write some tools to, you know, help me do this better or whatever. Really the focus here is, it's not to say you don't need to do that stuff, because you always do, but it puts the focus up front on delivering business value, actual stuff that the business can measure and say, this feature improved our product, and it's measurable that way. This is an important point, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, but it makes it clear which test cases need to be written because it's all just spelled out. And we'll see a concrete example, so all of this will make more sense later. And it helps document the intent of the code, which as developers, you probably know that a lot of times either you have no comments in code you've inherited, or if you do have comments, they aren't telling you why something was done. They're telling you how it was done or what's being done or maybe what used to be done, but it no longer does that because somebody changed the code and didn't change the comment. But here, if somebody changes the code and they don't change the BDD, you're going to have a failure. You're going to know that the functionality has changed one way or the other. So that's another good important part of it is it actually captures that missing piece that people don't really comment very well on, which is what is the purpose of this? What purpose does this serve? Why are we putting this code into the application? So any questions on any of this so far? Pretty clear? Oh yeah, that's because I always put just funny, weird little stuff in the titles to see if you guys are paying attention. That's all. That was intentional. See, I did it again. Okay, so what we have here, this isn't the only tool, but probably the premier tool is Cucumber. And yes, I've come to the conclusion that all the good names in software have been taken because now all you have are really weird names. But anyway, sorry, Cucumber guys. It's just basically a tool that parses and reads that text and then executes the tests in an automated fashion. Gherkin is the actual language that you're writing it in. So when I say plain English, I'm fudging a little bit. It's plain English, but it has to be formatted in a certain way. But it's non-technical enough that even non-technical people can learn the rules very easily and use them. So yeah, I already covered that point about product owners. And basically, the way we use it here, this isn't necessarily universal with BDD, but the way we use it here is this is kind of our contract between the product owner and us. Product owner gives us the BDD, and as long as we write code that passes all the BDD, we're done. We did our jobs for that particular function. Does that make sense? Because it's basically functionality that we both sides have agreed upon that this makes sense and this will work, and then we actually make it work. Any questions here? Okay. So, there you go. Another one for you, Vikram. Once upon a time. All right. For those of you, this is the brief tutorial I promised if you're not familiar with Agile and Scrum. Basically, Agile and Scrum are methodologies of software development. If you've heard of like the waterfall method, that's one of the old ways of developing code. And Agile and Scrum and other related processes are newer and better ways of developing software and avoiding things like death marches, which, everybody hates, where you're literally working on an application for years and years and years, and then you're getting close to the deadline and, half of it doesn't work. That's what you're trying to avoid. So what you do is you work in short time periods called sprints. We happen to have 2-week sprints here. And so you decide, between you and the product owner, how much work are we going to get done? The product owner says, I want these features done. We get to decide as the developers, well, this is how much we can get done off your list. So he's the one that gets, he or she are the ones who get to decide what the priorities are and all of that stuff. We get to decide, though, how much we think we can actually accomplish. So it's not like the deadline's already known. We've got 2 weeks to work on it. But the developers have control over how much work they're actually promising to do, as opposed to, a lot of top-down methodologies where you're given a deadline and you're given the work and it's like, get it done. And this is the deadline and it doesn't change. And, we don't care how many hours you have to work, just do it. So it also tends to help avoid working weekends and nights and stuff like that. Not always, but a lot of times. So basically, a user story is a high-level description of a specific feature from the end user perspective. So if, they are using an application, say, piece of medical software, they have to enter, they have to have the ability to enter a new patient's information into the system. That would be like an example of a feature that you would need. And that's pretty, you can define that down pretty well. You have a pretty good idea of what information you need on the patient and all of that good stuff. So that is something that I would consider usable as a user story. So I also kind of think about it, other people may disagree with me, but for me, it's kind of a unit of work. It's like if a user story is too big, then we say, to fit in one sprint, then we say, hey, we've got to break this down. This is too big. So then you break it down into smaller and smaller pieces until you can finally say, yes, we maybe can't complete all of that, but we can complete this part of it, this subset of it in a 2-week period. And that's what you go for. So that's what a user story is. There's a lot of terminology that gets slung around in this stuff. You have to kind of learn the lingo. And this is an example of basically how a user story is written. As a, I can't even think of the person. Lover of pizza, yes. As a lover of pizza, I want to be able to log my favorite pizza restaurants all over the country so that all my friends can see, what the great pizza joints are all over the country. And so maybe this is a phone app you're working on. So, just something like that. You've got a very specific layout, and you will see this part of it as the very high-level part when we actually get to the tests. So they're based on user stories. I just wanted to give the Scrum Agile thing for those who are not familiar with it and haven't done it before, because I know not everybody has. Any questions on any of that before we move on?
Sprints. Is that
Yes.
interchangeable with iterations, or are they distinctly different?
That's a good question, because I don't know what the definition of an iteration is. I'm guessing they're probably similar in concept. There you go.
Do you do planning?
We do, yeah.
Call it sprint planning?
Sprint planning, yes.
Call it iteration planning.
There you go. So it sounds like they are, yes. All right.
Sounds like sprinting is just a little more motivating.
I guess so, yes.
You iterate. I think iteration planning makes
Yeah.
you iterate over the work each.
That's true. Yeah. Again, that I don't know where all this lingo came up with. Some consultant somewhere who invented this stuff came up with this language. So we just have to learn it, and I thought I would explain some of it.
Daily stand-ups.
We do. Yes. So
Talk about what you did yesterday, what you're going to do today.
yes, and whether or not you have any blockers, and if so, what they are. Yep. So it sounds like we're doing the same thing. Yep. Definitely.
Does anybody use Kanban?
Uh,
Which is less like iterations and more like a continuous. It's not waterfall, but it's
Okay, not here that I'm aware
I'm
of.
sure they're mixing different teams use different.
Okay,
different
gotcha.
tools using
No, we're pretty much Agile Scrum across the entire organization now, as far as I know. Although we are worldwide, so I can't claim to know everything that's going on in this company. So, all right. So the first thing we do is create what's called a feature file. And I will show you one of those so that you'll better understand this. All right. So you notice the line 2. As a developer planning to use hello.pm, I want to test the functionality of hello.pm in order to have confidence in it. So you can see I use the language of a user story right there. That's basically what it is. And I will warn you up front, there's not going to be a ton of complicated Perl code tonight. That's intentional because I really wanted to focus on the testing and how the testing works, and I didn't want anyone to get hung up on what's this code doing and why is he doing that this way and whatever. So this is dead simple code that we're testing, but I wanted it to use it to illustrate how you actually go through BDD. So background is basically something that you want to happen once at the beginning of something. So given, you notice, actually, I was surprised and amazed to find out that Vim actually highlights as syntax highlighting for feature files, because this was all actually done in Vim. So you notice all the different color or the keywords. So, and I told you it was relatively simple. You can tell most of it's black, so it's just a few things that are keywords. So given a usable hello class, that's like the baseline. If we don't have a class, we can't do anything, right? So that's the most basic assumption we're making. Okay, and then you have the scenario, which is the thing that actually talks about the functionality. So you just kind of say what it's about, check default output. So given a hello object, when I've called the output method on it, then the output is hello world. So, right? Plain English, you would agree that even non-technical people can understand what that means. So we've defined exactly what we expect out of this hello object that we're creating, at least based on the output method. We haven't talked about any other methods. Right now, that's all we're talking about is we have a hello object and we have an output method on it. That's it. You don't want to get any, greater in granularity than that for a particular scenario. You want it to be very focused and testable. So far, anybody have any questions on any of this? Okay, because this is one of the important parts that you understand this part, because everything else is based on this file. All right, so then we create the steps file, or step def file, a lot of people call it. That's the thing, because you can tell this is not actually code. Here's the actual test code. And so, believe it or not, this is actually the more complicated piece than the actual piece of code that we're testing. Normally, that's not going to be the case, but I did it that way deliberately tonight, just so we could focus on this. So I'm using TestMore, which is, one of the most popular testing frameworks out there. I mean, there are a lot of them, but that's one of them. And test BDD Cucumber is the Perl module that implements Cucumber in Perl. And I should also mention, I wanted to mention this earlier, that one of the reasons why Cucumber is so popular is because it has implementations in almost every language you can think of. So, Ruby, Java, JavaScript, Perl, Python, whatever you can think of. If it's out there, it probably has an implementation. So we're not going to worry about use method signatures. That's just something that Cucumber uses. And we'll get to why I'm using the scalar util later. And line 10 is a bit of a hack. I'm just telling it where my Perl module is going to reside because of my directory structure. Normally you do this a lot cleaner, but again, I wanted to keep everything simple so we can focus on the important parts. So here's where we're starting. Given a usable, you notice we have \s, which \S means any non-white space character as a regular expression or part of a regular expression. The plus means one or more. So if we look back at this, what does that look like? Given a usable hello class. So right there, that grabs hello out of there. And it puts it into $1. And this whole line, the way the given, the func, all of that is the Cucumber stuff. The rest of it, like the use okay, that comes from test more. And people that have used any of the Perl testing stuff have probably seen that before. All it's doing is attempting to use the module and saying whether or not it succeeded in doing that. Because if you have a syntax error in it, it's going to fail if you try to use it. Or you forgot the magic one at the end of it or something, it's going to fail. So that's all that's doing is literally just saying, can I load this module up? That's it. So again, you remember how I indicated that's our baseline. That's the first thing we want to know is, can we even load this thing? Because if we can't do that, we can't do anything. So given a hello object, func cucumber, and again, the cucumber object is what you can do things with, and I'll explain that in the body here. So I'm creating a new hello object based on the assumption that my use worked. I create a new object, and then I check if it's blessed, and that comes from scalar util. It just will tell me whether or not it's blessed, because I want to do that first before I do an arrow isa on it, because if it's not a blessed object and I try to invoke a method on it, it's going to blow up horrendously. So I'm just protecting myself there from blowing up. First checking if it's blessed. If it is blessed, then we're asking, is it a hello object? And if so, the comment that I get is hello object created. Okay, here's the Cucumber object. What it does is it gives us the ability to maintain some state between tests. So it's got several different stashes, but the only one that I'm using, if you want to know more, you can look at the docs, but the only one that I'm using is the scenario stash. And it's just basically a hash reference that you can stuff anything you want in. So I'm just stuffing in hello, the key hello. I'm putting in the hello object because I want to use that later. I'm going to actually stop here before I go any further. Everybody with this so far? Does it kind of make sense to everybody? Okay, good. All right. So those are the givens. Now we're done with the givens. Now the when. When I've called the output method on it, and if I wanted to get fancy, I could have done a regular expression and grabbed output out of there. It did occur to me, but I was like, it really doesn't gain me anything, so I ended up not doing it. If I was testing a whole bunch of methods and I just wanted to say this sentence over and over again with different method names in there, and you could invoke them all in the same way, then it might be worth doing that, because then you get some reuse out of it. But otherwise, it's probably not worth it. So what I do, the first thing I do is pull my hello object that I've already created out of the stash. And then I basically invoke the output method on it at the end, and then I stuff that into hello output in the stash. So does that make sense so far? So yes, go ahead.
Does that clobber the hash value that includes the hello, which making a hash reference out?
That's actually a good point, yes. I didn't need it anymore, but that's actually a very good point that you raised. Yes, it does indeed clobber my hello object, which would be bad if I still needed to do that. And if I did, I wouldn't have done it this way. But yes, I'm glad you brought that point up. That is a very good point. So does that make sense to everybody, since I'm reusing the hello key right over there and then output after it? I'm actually clobbering my hello object. But the thing is, I don't need it anymore. So I just did it this way. I probably should have just said scenario output and done it that way. That probably would have been better.
Question two, if
Yeah.
you have multiple objects, then what could it be?
Whatever you want. You just call it whatever. Foo, Doug, function, method, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Literally, this stash is just a hash reference that you can stuff anything you want into it.
Well, that I know. I just
Okay.
The language, though, with the first two, the givens actually reference hello. One implicitly, the other one explicitly, and then the other ones don't define what it is you're operating on.
Oh, okay.
So like I'm saying, I called the output method on hello instead of on it. Shouldn't the language be more like that, or? Because
Yeah, either way. Yeah, either way. If
that just complicated it. You're saying.
no, I think that's a matter of taste and preference. 6 in one, half dozen the other. The idea just being that
I mean, if you're testing multiple
this is,
objects, by chance.
yeah, if you were testing multiple objects, I would agree. Yeah.
Which one you're supposed to call.
But I could have just as well said hello instead of it at the end of that. The point is all this is doing, what Cucumber is literally doing, if you haven't, just picked up on this yet, is it's figuring out which test to run based on running a regular expression against this file. So whatever step that it matches here, if you put something in parentheses in there, it grabs that piece out and uses that as part of the test. If you don't, then it just matches against that and goes, oh, okay, for this step, I run this test. And if you don't have, a step, or if you don't have a step definition for one of these lines, then obviously, that's not gonna work as a test because there's nothing there. So it's got to match. You've got to have a matching part in the steps file to match that. Does that make sense to everybody? But yes, you do make a good point that if I wanted to be more explicit, I could have used hello instead of it. So,
Could refer to the last object you referred to.
yeah, exactly. Either way, it doesn't really matter because again, this, as long as your product, owner understands it and your developers understand it, you're good. If the product owner in the meeting said, hey, what's it mean here? Then I would change this and go, okay, yeah, that's not very clear. I'll change that to hello. So again, the point here is that you both agree on what the language says and that it's going to do what you want it to do.
And then you can have more than one when after the given.
Yes, absolutely. And actually what you can have, another piece of syntax that it's got is actually you can use ands in givens and whens and thens. And what and is treated as is it's just treated as the same thing that it came after. So if it came after a then, all those ands are treated like thens as individual steps. So yeah, that way, because it reads more naturally that way. Then this and this and this and that and the other thing. This will actually get more complicated as we go. I'm going to build on this. We're just scratching the surface here. Okay, so the last part, looking at line 27, then the output is you notice in quotes, I grabbed what was in between the quotes, and that was hello world. Formatted exactly like that, comma, single space, exclamation point. The way I've written it, it's got to match that exactly. If you needed more flexibility, then you could build that in. But in my case, that's all I wanted. So then I use the is function, which again, that comes from test more. That's not a Cucumber thing. That's just a Perl testing thing. It's just saying, is this what I stuffed in output the same as what I pulled out of the features file, right? Which was hello world. So if those two things don't match, then the test fails. If they do match, the test succeeds. Everybody clear with that so far? Okay, I see some nods. All right. So then we fail. So just like I described in test-driven development, in BDD, we also want to fail. That's one of the first steps. You want to have your tests set up first, and you want them to fail miserably the first time you run them. And I will illustrate that point in just a second. So it's a critical step. Basically, they don't want you to be guessing at the code or anything before you run the test the first time. You run the test first, it fails. So let's go ahead and quit talking about that and actually do that. Okay, you remember the language is Gherkin. It's Perl, so they put a P on the front of it, so it's Firkin, I guess. I have no idea how to pronounce it, but anyways, this is the actual command line tool that will execute the test for us. So you see the white part at the top is just the user story part of it, right? That's just description stuff. That's not actually testing anything. So scenario, check default output. You notice given usable hello class is in red. We failed already. And if you read down here, failed test, use hello, and tried to use hello, can't locate hello. Guess what? I have no code. I haven't written any code. This is what I expect to see. I haven't written anything. Hopefully I have, oh good, I have tree on here. So this is my directory structure. I've got and this is the convention that's used so that Cucumber knows where to look for files and figure everything out. So you have a features directory, and we have hello feature. Don't worry about the .htmls. Those are the ones I'm showing you in the browser. Those are not actually run. So it's hello.feature. Could be, I could have named that anything. Really doesn't matter what the first part of the name is, but it better be .feature. Then hello steps, which the hello parts do need to match. So if I change the name of hello up there, I got to change it in the _steps.pl. That's just so that it knows which file to look in to find the steps, the test steps for the features file. Does that make sense to everybody? And that's all I got. I've got a features file. Again, ignore the HTML, pretend it doesn't exist. I've got a features file and I've got a steps file. That's all I've got. So everybody clear on that? That's why my test failed miserably.
So all of the steps for a feature have to be in the steps file for that feature?
Yes, at least according to the documentation I read. So as far as I know, that is the case. Go ahead.
So should the code be written first or test first?
Test first. I've written no code, zero code here.
How does it check to make sure that you've implemented all the feature pieces in the steps file?
Well, I'm going to get to that. That's an excellent segue. That's where we're going next. Basically, what I'm doing here, this is kind of hard to do because it's a process. So in order to do this presentation, I'm showing you the snapshots in time as I would develop this stuff piece by piece. I'm showing you every step that I went through. So we're just doing this a step at a time. So this is what we've got so far.
Does
Yes.
So it's a test first, right?
Yes.
That kind of confuses me with TDD. It looks similar to TDD.
Well, it is. It is. It's like a descendant of TDD. Some of the problems. So actually, I'm glad you asked that question. Some of the problems that this was meant to solve, and I think I may have some of this later on a later slide, but with TDD, a lot of times developers would go, well, where do I start? I know I need to write some tests for whatever this function's going to do, but I don't really know where to start. I don't really know what to do. Whereas here, well, it's spelled out for you right there in plain English what you need to test. So there's no question of where do you start, what do you test? It's all there. And I'll talk some more things later. But you're right, they are very similar. The principle of testing first is obviously there. It's just, also in TDD, there was no, business or product owner involved really in the tests. They would give you the spec, and then you would write the tests the best you could based off of their spec. But there's not necessarily any communication or agreement on that other than here's the spec, write it, and then you go and write some tests. It's not like your business owner's going to come and look at your tests and tell you whether or not you did it right? Whereas this, they can tell based off of the language whether or not you're doing it right. Now, obviously, that's not guaranteeing that the test step that you write is correct, but it does help to at least get you further along and reduce the chances that you're doing the wrong thing. At least at the top level, you should be doing the right thing.
So the spec would translate to a feature here.
Exactly. Yes, it would be the feature file would be considered the specification. So, question, I can tell.
Well, it's still seems like a top-down process. So you're not thinking about reusability. You're not thinking about modular code. You're writing out the whole description of the app first, and then you're going to hook it up later somehow.
Yes. Well, and I'll get to that. If you remember from the TDD, that last, well, it was the second to last bullet point, which was refactor. That's the part where you get into that because that still needs to be done. Yes, you still have to consider code reuse and efficiency and reducing redundancy or eliminating it and all of that stuff. Yes, that's all still there. That's the refactoring part of it. So basically, you just write something that makes the test pass, and then you go, okay, that's good, my test passed, but now how do I really want to, implement this? And then you go in, and that's when you do your test, make sure that if you've got other methods that you can call that you don't need to create new ones for this, you can use those. Or obviously you could do that ahead of time if you were aware of it. But the point is that I agree, yes, it's top down on that side, but once you get into the actual implementation, it's not like the product owner standing over you saying, oh, we don't have time for you to refactor that. You can't do it. Because during the planning meetings, the product owner said, this is what I want done. These are the priorities. And the developer said, this is what we think we can do. And in our minds, we have to take into account stuff like that. Are we going to, because we may actually do that. We may weight a story a little higher because we know in that section of the code, there's refactoring we need to do. It's starting to get a little messy. We want to clean it up a little bit. So we'll say, yeah, that's going to take us a little more than what you thought it was. And then we just go ahead and do our refactoring and stuff. As we're doing the functionality, we can do the refactoring. But the important part is you've got to test for it. So when you refactor it, I'm kind of giving away the punchline here later on, but when you refactor it, at least if the test still pass, you didn't break it. So,
Well,
go ahead.
The thing I don't understand about it is it looks like it's a way to have confidence in ad hoc feature development. And maybe what you were saying is, how does the hierarchy of features start? Meaning, do you start with a test that says the application should start? Because if you're just doing sort of ad hoc features, by the time you start corralling them all together, how do you know that you have a good design?
Well, that, okay.
Collected a bunch of features.
All's like, well, I could use different examples, but I'll use the example of how things work here is we have UX people that think about the design of the screens and are they usable and are they laid out nicely and are they clear what you're supposed to do with them? Or is the text on the button explicit enough to tell you what does that button do? So they worry about all that stuff. They do that on their side. They collaborate with the product owner. And so all of that stuff gets done. So this, when I say this is the spec, maybe I'm overstating my case a little bit. This is like the baseline of the spec. You can have more information that comes along. So we can have screenshots of this is exactly, how we want it to look. Or even more information that says, in these different cases, we want this, this, and this to happen. But an argument could still be made that a developer could take those this, and thises and turn them into, a scenario and actually test them. Is that cleared up at all? Or did I go off on a tangent? I may have gone off on a tangent.
Yeah, it looks like it's good for testing features.
Yes, well, and that's what it's designed for.
It doesn't look like it says anything about architecting the system.
No, and that's still the responsibility.
The product owner is not going to know how to architect the system. He'll know how to say, I want these features. There's a million different ways
Well,
that smart engineers
I guess it depends. Yes, and that's true. I guess your experience may vary because in our case, our product owner is actually heavily involved in that. So I guess it depends on your product owner as to how much of that gets, weighed on the development team versus the product guy. In our case, our product guy is really, really involved. So a lot of the architecture stuff gets hashed out between us and him, and he's really involved with it. You may have somebody else who's more hands off and just, says make it work well, make it so that, someone who is, just running this program, with minimal training can use it and understand it.
Don't forget the key word here is behavior-driven development, right?
Yeah, that's,
And tester development, wouldn't give you that anyway either. It's not going to tell you how to design your architecture.
that's correct because,
Well, I think it assumes that you already know what your architecture is, and now
yes.
with implementation, you're testing whether you can
It doesn't have to. I don't think it has to.
No, it doesn't have
Yeah. And again, this doesn't preclude, as long as whatever code you write and however you architect it is irrelevant as long as it passes the test. You know what I'm saying? So it's not to say that it completely eliminates the autonomy of developers. They still get to architect or refactor or whatever, design however they want, as long as it meets the test criteria. So that's basically, how it works for an ongoing, project like ours, where that's what we do is we're just every sprint we're adding incremental features. We've already got the basic application is there, it's built. It's not, in our case, we're not starting from scratch. We're just adding new features every sprint. It's like we want to be able to search by name and telephone number. Like that was actually a real feature we added last sprint. And you can tell name, telephone number, you can pretty easily put that into this kind of language and then test it.
You've got about 10 minutes.
Oh, thanks. Wow. Where did the time go? Okay, hopefully at least somewhat. If anybody's got any deeper questions, feel free to hit me up afterwards too, so I can get everybody out of here on time. So, let's go back. Okay, so now we're going to add some code. So we're going to create the hello module. I'm going to have to go a little faster because I had no idea I was that far behind. We're going to add a new method, and an output method, and hopefully profit. So this is the first step, right? That's pretty much the bare minimum I need to have a valid Perl module that does nothing. So if I run this test, you notice again, that's more or less comments at the top. Given a usable hello class, that part actually succeeded now because I have a bare minimum module, but given a hello object and trying to do something with it, well, it doesn't do anything yet. It's just there. So, but I got the important part is I got my first test green, so that's progress. And I just wanted to point out, I won't do this on every one, but this is the new part, is under lib, I've got hello.pm, which I just showed you the contents of. So that's the new part. None of the rest of this really changed. You can ignore the dist ini that has to do with the program that I use to generate modules. That's an entirely another presentation. Okay, now we want to create a new method, constructor, so we can actually construct the object. I'm not going to talk about this because unfortunately people who don't know object-oriented Perl, I'm sorry, but this is pretty much the standard way of doing it. There are variations on this, but this is fairly standard. I'm just creating a blessed reference and returning it. So I hope I'm not going to get these confused going too fast. Now you notice I've got two. I've got given a usable hello class, given a hello object, because now I've got a constructor, so I can actually construct one, and then I fail miserably because it tries to, can't locate object output or object method output because I haven't created that yet. So, but as you can tell, I'm making progress. So here we go. I create output. Again, dead simple. Literally just returns hard-coded hello world. So we come here and we run the test for that. Ta-da, it works. I'm done. I've implemented the feature. It does what we said in plain English it would do, right? So that's the simple part. Well, what happens after the product owner goes, what you did last sprint, that's really good, but now we want to do whatever. So now we're going to look at what you do when they come back and they want to change things or add more features. Okay. And the only, there for Vikram, the only thing that is constant is change, as developers know. So you've got a new scenario that's been requested. So the first thing you do is you go back and do your test stuff first, your hello feature, your hello steps. And I want you to note the code reuse when I show you those files. And then again, we're going to see some failure because we haven't written the new code yet. And then we need to write the code to make it pass. So you notice now at the bottom, everything above line 12 and above is identical. The only thing that's new is 14 and below. So given a hello object, when I've called the output method with Doug on it, then the output is hello, comma, Doug. So now we want the output method not to just say hello world. We want it to say hello world. Up there, we've still got that scenario. That's still a requirement. That hasn't changed. But if you pass it a name, you want it to also say hello to that person's name. Make sense, right? We would just want something that's a little more flexible. The default's going to be if you don't pass it any name, it says hello to the world. If you pass it a name, it's going to say hello to that person. Everybody with me so far? I know I'm kind of going a little fast now. And this is the part where I want you to notice the code reuse. Literally, I'm going to skip most of this because most of this is identical. The only thing that I've added is line 32 through 36 because guess what? Those regular expressions already match the scenario text on the previous file. If you look at the way I wrote those scenarios, given a hello object, given a hello object, when I've called the output method on it, when I've called the output method with Doug on it. So that's the only part that's really changed. That and then the output is hello Doug. So other than that, I don't have to write new code for given a hello object. I already know how to do that, right? I already have a step for that. So that literally gets reused in both cases. And that is something that was amazing even to me when I did this because I knew you could get code reuse, but it was literally like, oh my gosh, I don't need to write any of this stuff because I literally did start writing it. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't need any of this. I've already got the steps for it. So that's one of the great things is it's really good for actually, getting a lot of code reuse more or less by accident. It just tends to happen. And so now we should expect some failure because I promised you some. So there we go. So you notice everything's still green in my hello world part because that's how it works. Well, now I passed the first couple, but I failed where I passed it a name because I haven't written that yet. So now we're going to go back. Only a few people are going to get this joke. You got to read the title and read the joke. It's an Arrested Development joke. Anyway, okay, so basically in doing this, I'm showing the scenario where you code it to the new spec, but you regressed and broke the old spec, which you shouldn't have done. But the good news is, at least we know what we broke and where it's and exactly what it is that's broken. And then we're going to fix it. So that, oops. Would be this one. Okay, you notice now all of this stuff is green, but my hello world is blown up. Let's see why. Hello 3. Okay, I apologize. I don't think I opened that one. I thought I did. Okay. Well, you can see what I did is I coded specifically for expecting a name. There's no more default case of world if you don't get a name. So, but I found out really quickly that, hey, doofus, you did it wrong. It's like you matched the new spec and that passes, but you broke the old spec. So we've got to go ahead and fix it. So that's what I've done here is, just added a little logic that says, if I have a name, use the name. Otherwise, use line 14 up here, the default name that I'm setting up in the object to be world. So in the default case, it's going to use world if you don't pass it anything. If you do pass it something, it's going to use name. So let's see whether or not I was right. And there you go. You fix the regression. You know exactly from the test where it was broken, what you broke. Now everything's green. Ta-da, we're done. Oh man, 2 minutes to spare. Any questions?
Full-scale spec basically pages and pages of feature files. Or feature file with lots of scenarios.
Well, eventually you'll get there. But with the Agile methodology, you're only going to get a few, like a handful of scenarios every 2 weeks. And then you would add those. So yes, eventually this will grow and grow and grow. Or you would create new feature files. If it has nothing to do with, new patient information, if it has to do with prescription medications or something, then that would be a whole new feature file because that's a new functionality that's not necessarily related to what you've already got. So the idea though is that you want your test suite to grow because over time your code becomes more complex, more likely to break. And, which reminds me, I still need to go back to this, the last point. Achievement unlocked, confidence. We now have confidence that my code does what the spec told it to do, right? We just went through it, we broke it, realized we broke it, we fixed it, ran the test, and all the tests passed, so we go, yeah, we're golden. Now is where you would get into architecture, code reuse, refactoring, all of those things. I made the test pass. Did I implement it the best way? I don't know. Let's have a discussion amongst the team to decide if there's a better way of doing it, or let's have a code review and say, yeah, really, you could have done this a different way. Instead of using an if statement, you should have used a hash or something like that, So that's where you can get into the other minutia of development. So there's still lots of room for that stuff to happen as long as you actually pass the test. Yes.
So you did this by hand in a command line environment. What would you do to automate this?
Actually, we do have this automated in Java. Although right now I'll be honest, we're having problems and we've got a lot of stuff not passing, but it's a lot of very complicated things going on at once, and BDD is relatively new to all of us. So we're, learning the hard way, which is actually part of, I'll have to admit, I was a little selfish in writing this because, hey, it gave me practice. I spent the entire last weekend writing BDD tests for this presentation. So basically through Jenkins or, any of your other automated build tools, or in Maven, or if you're using makefiles, you put it in your makefiles as one of your, make. You could have, make cucumber or make feature or whatever, and it would run those tests in an automated way. Totally depends on what your development environment is, but it fits in with whatever automation tools you already use. You just add that in there. And there are a lot of, other fancy add-ons. You can get reports generated for you, which, we do. We get nice graphs and things like that of what's green and what's red and what passed and what didn't. And, depending on your tool, we're using Jenkins and Selenium. And we're actually now something that we're adding to try to make this better, especially for non-technical people, is if a test fails, it's actually doing a check. We call it the traffic light because it's all red and green on the services we call. And so it pops that up, takes a screenshot of it, and attaches it to the report. So somebody can literally just click on that link, see the screenshot. Oh, the service was down. That's why it failed.
So what if the tests are not fitting for the service?
Well, then obviously somebody's got to dig in and figure out why. And the idea being, though, that once you have a stable environment, the test would pass all the time. But right now, that's part of the problem, is getting a stable environment, having services up all the time, or at least whenever you're running your tests, stuff like that. So, yeah. Well, that actually I can't speak too much to, because again, this is very new to us. This is like only our third sprint of doing BDD. No, those are all very good questions. It's not hard to locate, as you can tell. It pretty much pinpoints, which test is failing. It's not really that hard. You just, if you're doing Java stuff, you look at the stack trace and, see what blew up, or, or if it's Perl, it tells you right there exactly. Tried to call a method and it wasn't there, so whatever.
This would be, the VDD would be checking features at a higher level, and like if in your class you were calling private methods to do different go? Because they wouldn't.
Yes, this would be equivalent, or in our case, a replacement for functional tests, not unit tests. Unit tests are at a different level. This really doesn't have anything to do with unit testing. This has to do with functional testing. So if you're just, which I'll admit, you could argue that I'm almost bordering, because this was so simple, I'm almost bordering on, unit tests. Most of the time you would have way more complicated stuff. But again, you notice how many questions we had, even with as simple as I made it. And this makes me all the more happy that I made it really simple, because I had no idea I took that much time in the middle to answer questions. It was like 10 minutes. Oh my gosh, where'd the time go? So yeah, does that answer for you then?
The data is mocked here, and the function test data need not be mocked.
Yeah, well, that again gets into, as Google terms it, like small, medium, large tests. So you've got, like integration tests, which are complete end to end, test everything from the application all the way to the database, through all the middleware and all of that junk. Make sure it all works. And these tests are more like medium tests. So you may end up mocking some stuff here. You may end up mocking a service call or a database call or something like that, because you're really looking at the feature. You're not trying to test complete end-to-end functionality all through the system. So in this case, obviously, it was simple enough. I didn't need to mock anything. But if it was doing something useful, like grabbing names out of the database or something, I would mock the database part of it, because that's really kind of outside the scope of, just doing a functional test. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Any other questions? All right, thank you all for coming. I hope this was enjoyable and educational.